I think this is the most important election of my lifetime for two related reasons, admittedly. The first is a very personal one. This is the first presidential election I will vote in as a mom. And I didn't know I could care any more about the political process and who runs for office or who holds office until I became a mom. And this is probably not an uncommon evolution for those of us who are parents. And that surprised me because I was probably that age when I started going to political events like this, to listen to candidates and surrogates talk about issues that were at stake, whether we were at an event for my dad or we were at an event for whomever was running for mayor of Little Rock or to represent Arkansas in Congress or the Senate, or of course he was the Democratic standard bearer in a presidential election year. The second reason I think this is the most important election of my lifetime is that everything I care most about, I worry is at risk. So I'd like to talk about a few issues and then, as Bria said, open it up to your questions about whatever may be on your hearts and minds as you're thinking about whether to participate in this election at all, whether you're thinking about whom to support, or if you've already decided to support my mom, how you're thinking about to encourage your family, your friends, your classmates about why staying on the sidelines is not in any of our best interest. So just a few examples. The next president will appoint up to 3 justices of the Supreme Court. I think this is something that we don't spend enough time talking about in our public dialogue around this election. And when this does come up, it's too often narrowly defined through the question of campaign finance reform. Now, I agree. I hope that Citizens United is overturned. I also really support my mom's proposal for a constitutional amendment, so hopefully we don't have to wait for a court case to finally reform our campaign finance system. But there's so much more at stake. Here's just a few examples of why the court matters, I think. There have been more than 300 laws passed since 2010 restricting a woman's right to choose at the state and local level. Some of those laws are already being contested. Some of those that are being contested will reach the Supreme Court. This is not only an issue about women's rights or human rights, it's also an issue about economic equity and agency. Wealthy women in our country have always had choices. Middle-class, working-class women haven't. So choice for me represents so much more than just a woman being able to make what she believes is the right choice for herself and her family, but also for her career. And it matters to me that my mom is the candidate that consistently talks about protecting a woman's right to choose. Second, there's still 31 states in our country where it's legal to discriminate against someone on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. So while marriage equality is hugely important, it is not the end of ensuring that we have equal opportunities and rights for our LGBT community. And it really matters to me that my mom has been out in front supporting the American Equality Act, and also that while she was Secretary of State, she talked about equal rights for LGBT Americans around the world, but also for non-Americans around the world. She made it someone's job at the State Department to know what was happening for the LGBT community in different countries across the globe so that we could expedite asylum processes. People were being persecuted for who they are and who they love. That matters to me. The Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court vacated part of the Voting Rights Act, even though arguably this is a time of increased voter suppression, and so we should be going in the opposite direction in terms of scrutiny and enforcement. That is currently again being challenged, and also may once again in a different form reach the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is really important. Something else I worry a lot about is healthcare. As my mom jokes, before it was called Obamacare, it was called Hillary Care. Now for the students in the room, this probably was before you were born, but I remember in 93 and 94 when my mom was fighting for universal health care. And depending on your perspective, she either famously or infamously failed in that effort. And she either could have given up and said, well, it didn't work out, or she could have said, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let's see what we can still do to expand healthcare coverage. And so she spent the next 3 years building a bipartisan coalition, because she had to do that, because then, like now, we had a Republican Congress, a bipartisan coalition to pass the Children's Health Insurance Program. The Children's Health Insurance Program today insures more than 8 million low-income kids, including tens of thousands here in South Carolina. That matters to me, that she's a real problem solver and that she doesn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think what President Obama has done with the Affordable Care Act is extraordinary. When we get the newest numbers from the latest open enrollment period, there will probably be more than 20 million Americans who have health insurance today who didn't when President Obama took office. Now, of course, we need to do more to encourage governors like yours here in South Carolina to expand Medicaid, to ensure that every person in South Carolina has health insurance. We need to do more to get out-of-pocket costs down. My mother's been working for literally more than 20 years to give Medicare the authority to negotiate with drug companies. That'll help drive down drug costs for Medicare recipients, but really for the rest of us too, because it'll be a lot harder for drug companies to justify really high prices when people on Medicare are paying much, much lower prices. We need to go after the pharmaceutical companies that are engaging in predatory pricing. So there's absolutely unfinished work. But as my mom, I think, has said really aptly, it's a lot easier to go from 90% insurance coverage, which is where we are now, to 100% insurance coverage, than going back and starting at 0 and trying to get from 0 to 100. And I think this is a really important point because we do have a Republican Congress. And even in the most optimistic, now speaking as a Democrat, just again, owning my biases, I'm a really proud daughter, I'm a really proud Democrat. Speaking as a Democrat, no one expects us to take back the House. This Congress has voted 63 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Most recently, just a few days ago. So if we open this debate again, I worry that we risk all the progress that President Obama has made with the Affordable Care Act. Progress like removing the lifetime caps on insurance, which ensures that people with chronic conditions, including children with chronic conditions, can get the health care that they need and that every American deserves. The last thing I'll talk about before I open it up to your questions to answer, again, whatever may be on your hearts and minds, is that I'm deeply concerned by the hate speech coming out of the Republican primary. That seems to now be so frequent and insidious that it's become normalized. The racism, the sexism, the jingoism, the Islamophobia, the homophobia, the anti-immigrant rhetoric, and I'm sure that I'm missing something. And it matters to me that my mom has a record of standing up against that rhetoric, but also figuring out how to prevent that rhetoric from seeping into the business of government. So that the American government, for example, again under the State Department when she was its leader, and this has continued under Secretary Kerry, made it a priority to protect LGBT rights around the world. That she talked about women's and children's rights everywhere she was, including in places like Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Yemen, where a woman is legally half a person to a man. That she created the first ambassador level position for someone to just focus on women's issues. Secretary Kerry has continued all of that. Why is that important? Well, I think it is important, candidly, that a man continue all of that. But it's also really important because once something has happened under 2 successive Secretaries of State, it's much harder for that to be dismantled later. It's much harder to rewrite all the job descriptions that she wrote. It's much harder to change what people are focused on at our embassies around the world. Because I think part of being an effective public servant is not only standing up for your values when you're in office, but protecting those values for when you're not in office. Because I certainly hope we don't have a Republican president ever again, but I feel better knowing that if we do, the State Department and Foreign Service of the United States is more likely to still be standing up for inclusive values because of the decisions that my mom made. So I, again, am clearly a very proud daughter, but I'm supporting my mom mainly now as a mom myself, because whomever we elect to be our next president will play such a fundamentally important role in shaping the world that my children will grow up in the country that they'll grow up in who they feel comfortable being and loving. Hopefully that they will be respected and not just tolerated. So I think this is really important, and I hope that you'll ask whatever questions, again, may be on your heart or in your mind as you're thinking about whether to engage in this election, thinking about whom to support, or thinking about how to persuade people that you know that really so much is at risk. We have to protect everything that President Obama has done and build on it and move forward. So thank you all again for having me, and I hope that you will ask questions, and if you don't, I will just keep talking.